Today on LA Currents, a new web series takes center stage while delivering a fun and heartfelt message for kids to embrace their cultural identity. Next, we examine the systemic problems of racism and poverty with a groundbreaking author and social issues commentator. But first, we welcome Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell, a citizen of the Wyandotte Nation, who is a part of the growing movement to honor Indigenous communities. Sometimes even the best of intentions have unfortunate results. It was in 1892, 1 year after 11 Italians were lynched in New Orleans, that the whole idea of Columbus Day came into being. It didn't go into actually being a holiday until 1934. But in all those years, we've learned that this particular holiday hurts a lot of people. And that's been changed in a lot of places. And I'm delighted to be joined by Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell from District 13. And here in Los Angeles, that whole idea of Columbus Day has changed for the last 2 years to Indigenous Peoples Day. Why was that important for you to put into place?
So in 2015, I introduced the initiative to replace Columbus Day from the city's administrative code with Indigenous Peoples Day. And after a 2-year journey, we were able to do that and adopt the official law in 2017 and then celebrate it for the very first time in Los Angeles in 2018.
I was surprised that the intent of Columbus Day was never supposed to be focused on Christopher Columbus. It was actually just marking a moment in time in which American, as they knew it then, and I'm going to be very careful in the way I say it, America, started its journey, and there was this backlash against Italian immigration and against Catholicism, and how things got skewed over the years and became a situation in which Christopher Columbus as an individual was being honored. And if you look into his history, there are so many atrocities, especially in regards to the indigenous people that you are referencing.
Right. So Christopher Columbus, like it or not, became the symbol.
Right.
Statues, monuments, major cities have been named in his honor.
Right.
And he himself, the historical record, is a fact. It reflects the acts of violence and really murder that he was responsible for personally. And then his 2 subsequent trips subjugating an entire native population across the Americas, Central and South America. And this is a man that never stepped foot in the continental United States and never discovered really anything.
Right.
So this isn't about the Italian culture or the Italian immigrant community or any particular heritage at all. It's about honoring the folks who are here before any of us to make it possible for us to live the life that we do in a way to honor First Peoples.
For some very sad reasons, obviously, because of COVID and because of the social injustice that we have all witnessed recently, probably energized people's verve to get going with this mindset.
The awareness of genocide, slavery, racial inequality, structural inequities just took a quantum leap forward after the murder of George Floyd. And the whole Native American cause is part of that zeitgeist. Native Americans in all the states didn't even have the right to vote fully in all of the states until the 1970s. Now, we were able to remove the Columbus statue, and that was on county property at Grand Park. And that was a struggle. The populations are just starting to tear these statues down themselves because of what they represent.
Destruction on its own is a negative thing as well.
Well, it is. Well, we know that the statue of Junipero Serra was torn down unceremoniously in June. The Native American community has been working for years with the Catholic Church on what Junipero Serra himself represents to local Native American tribes. That was a bit of a wake-up call for me to say, wait a second, that was on city property. We need an official way to deal with issues like this, which is why I've introduced a resolution that will become a city ordinance on how to actually recognize historical figures, monuments, and honorifics across the city of Los Angeles so that we can deal with some of these negative symbols of oppression that we as a people hold in high regard. Imagine what that does to a Native American kid or a black kid. it takes a psychological toll because you're told by the greater society that you are less than because we are celebrating this person who did something really bad to your people and your minority group. So we have to deal with all of that.
When you're dealing with the idea of these monuments and their symbols and how they can be painful, there's also the issue of the fact that these are works of art and it's a very tenuous balance that needs to be created. How can we address that without making it a problem in the future?
There are as many opinions about what to do with deassessed or decommissioned artwork as there are artists. Some of these works, sculptures were created at a different time entirely. I'll give you an example of the Columbus statue across the street at Grand Park. That was commissioned sometime in the 1970s by an Italian heritage group and was manufactured and then donated to the county of Los Angeles. Well, we placed it in storage, and it's up to the county, the County Arts Commission, to reach out to whomever they can find from that organization from the early 70s that donated it. So we're not going to just demolish it or destroy it. That has to be dealt with as well. The deaccessioning is more complicated than we're just going to tear that statue down. The important thing is that these monuments to folks who were guilty of genocide and or defending slavery are no longer in public view. That's also a conversation. Sometimes organizations want these statues donated to them, but that needs to be dealt with too, because in what form will they then be exhibited? So we certainly don't intend on causing additional harm. It's going to involve the artists and advocacy community to deal with how we deassess these statues and, figures of oppression.
There has to be thoughtful process both in taking things down as well as putting things up. So how does one go about doing that? Is there going to be a historic research committee? Is there going to be, a vote? How do you foresee that happening?
We created the template with Indigenous Peoples Day. We'll definitely form a working group. It'll be made up of local Native advocacy groups and anyone else who wants to join into the conversation. That will generate reports from city departments that will inform us, the elected officials, way forward on creating an ordinance that will deal with proposals. It will deal with currently, negative celebrated figures that are recognized as symbols of oppression or hatred. We'll involve scholars and historians and academics in this conversation, just like we did with Indigenous Peoples Day. There is no doubt in my mind that it will lead to information that a lot of people don't realize. And perhaps it'll lead to a way to honor the Tongva more because they were the folks that we've displaced centuries ago. To build the lives that we're all now enjoying. Real change, real policy change is important. Public safety reform, all important things, but symbolism is very important as well. That can lead to a larger conversation about how we make society more fair and equitable for everyone.
And what are you going to do to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day?
The first Indigenous Peoples Day at the steps of City Hall was historic. We had Redbone and we had the Black Eyed Peas and other famous musical groups, and we repeated that last year as well. So we're working closely with the City, County, Native American Indian Commission on a virtual platform of celebrations. But we're gonna shift on IPD toward advocacy, and while we celebrate what it is to be of Indigenous and Native American heritage at the same time. Human beings, we evolved from tribal units. And so I hope that everyone can relate that to be Native American is also just to be human. And we have a lot that we can learn from our Native American history. And celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day is certainly a way to do that.
Great. Well, congratulations. And I'm sure your grandfather would be very proud of you.
Thank you so much. I hope so. We all live in the existence of our ancestors, and the spirits speak to us. My grandfather, my mother, they're all very, very close to me and always will be. that's part of the legacy of being of Native American heritage as well.
Comedian Christina Wong enlisted the help of a 10-year-old family friend, and together they created the unscripted and rebellious web series, Radical Cram School.
I was one of the only Asian kids in my town, and so that made me feel like I had to sort of prove myself a lot. I guess you'd call it bullied now, a fair amount. Got called chink and gook and things like that.
Kids called us Chinese. And they said, go away, you have the coronavirus.
Like, people would pull their eyes back and they would just taunt me, and they would say, oh look, can you even see anything out of your eyes? Honestly, this kind of bullying was so common to me that I didn't even realize that it was actually bullying.
If they're young enough to experience racism and sexism and oppression, they're young enough to learn about it.
Welcome to Radical Cram School. We're going to learn about social justice, revolution, and how to be powerful in the bodies that you have.
I was on Facebook, and Teddy, who lives in Ohio, messaged and asked if I was going to be around LA on Christmas break, because basically Teddy's then 8-year-old daughter Liberty had come home saying,
I came home because some kids were being a bit strange when I mentioned that I was Chinese, or when they asked if I was Chinese or some sort of Asian. And so I came home and I told my dad and my mom that I wish I wasn't Chinese.
And Teddy wanted me, as an empowered Asian American woman, to say something to empower Liberty. And I was thinking, wow, I don't know what I would say to Liberty and her friends, because I was also someone at her age who was like, I wish I wasn't Chinese anymore. But instead of expressing my insecurities, I screamed aloud, let's make this a web series. I'll empower them. And this was the birth of Radical Cram School.
Your English is really good for an immigrant, Wing Wong.
Cram School, for context, is it's a nickname for a tutoring center in an Asian community, notorious for cramming Asian students with more knowledge than they should be able to handle, or make them cram for the SATs, make them cram science, and make them geniuses in a week. And so the joke as Radical Cram School was that we're cramming kids with radical social justice education.
So auto workers had no more jobs anymore. And black auto workers are having it worse because of racism. Lots of crime happens. Grace and Jimmy often had their house broken into.
This was an interesting challenge, but it was also this opportunity to kind of make the programming that I wanted to see when I was growing up.
My day job is I'm a professor at a university. And so I normally teach to undergraduates or graduate students. So this is very different than what I normally do, right?
This was a departure for all of us. This was really creating media content that's just not out there, and it was very exciting.
Men had the right to vote before women had the right to vote.
Yes.
So they definitely couldn't run for office. And there were women called the suffragettes, and they wanted the right to vote too. So they went out and they would protest wearing all white. So I wear white to honor the women who fought to give us the right to vote.
And in my job as a professor, we get to have a lot of conversations about race, social justice, identity. And I said, I remember feeling the same thing as a kid, coming home, like what Christina was saying, and wishing that I wasn't Chinese or Chinese American, or I fit in, right? The power of assimilation when you're a child is so powerful. And I thought, Liberty, it's good that you and I can have this conversation, but there are many peers and friends that we have that also might feel this way. And oftentimes their parents might react the way my parents said, and they would dismiss it, or they would say, what are you talking about, right? Because they didn't understand, right, just how vicious and how hurtful it can be to feel depowered. We're skirting over some very difficult and very intense subjects, the Japanese internment concentration camps, right? The sort of racial violence that's been felt throughout the United States, and talking about them through song and through skits, and opening up spaces for children to explore them themselves, as opposed to really coming at it head on.
What is this?
Misogyny.
Misogyny. What do we think it is?
Massage?
The misogyny parlor? That could be a thing. So misogyny is the hatred of women. Is that a weird?
Yeah. Weird. It's not fair to hate your mother or your sister or something like that.
There's, social justice information that we want to get across, and comedy is such a powerful tool for engaging people and getting that information across. So that's what we're really doing with Radical Cram School, is harnessing, the power of comedy and entertainment to communicate important messages that really affect all of us, but maybe we didn't realize affect kids a lot, and they don't get to talk about it a lot. So this is a space for kids to talk and to learn about those things.
We're learning right now in this time of COVID and learning online how important it is to be active and to be good with a camera and entertaining, because that's our only hope for translating information over to an audience. We really work because Teddy's background is an educator and mine is more as a big flailing visual performing artist. And we're trying to find ways that it's not just interesting for the cast of kids who's learning in front of a camera, but that the audience at home is also absorbing some of this information. So a lot of the aesthetic ends up being a lot of hand sewing. So you see a lot of felt signage. And we even made the costumes on our sewing machines, and trying to keep things as visual and colorful as possible.
I would say, Christina, Janessa, all of us, Anna Michelle, who did the songs, really did a great job of making these things appropriate for children in ways so that the fear and anxiety are not at the forefront, right? The actual issue is, what is fair? What is not fair? What does justice mean? And what are the societal, historical implications of these topics?
Interracial marriage was illegal.
Please welcome Auntie Mia Yamamoto!
I was born in Poston, Arizona. Poston, Arizona is a concentration camp for Japanese American people. 2 months after the Pearl Harbor attack on Hawaii, the government ordered the military to take us away and put us in camps. They were afraid of the Japanese people, that we might be dangerous to them. They took the babies away to camp. They took people who were disabled away to camp. They took everybody away to camp, even if it was ridiculous that they presented no danger at all. They put us all in camp, yes.
Why were people so scared back in the day?
I think a lot of meanness comes from fear. And when they think people of color are dangerous, they do things to us based on fear.
I've written stuff for children, I've written stuff for teachers, and it's rare to find stuff that's really resonating and talks to kids and treats kids as mature individuals who have stories and have ideas. And like Christina was saying, you don't have to learn about racism, you don't have to learn about exclusion and othering, because many children have experienced it in so many ways, right? They see and they hear things that oftentimes they might not know how to articulate in adult words, but they feel it. And so as a parent, it's been such an amazing opportunity to be part of Radical Cram School, because we get, I get to have something that I'm really proud to share with other parents.
In fact, we got a lot of wonderful messages from adults saying, I wish I had content like this when I was a kid. There was just nothing like this on TV or anywhere when I was a kid, and I'm so glad to have it. Or I watched this with my kid and we both, laughed, but we also had a great discussion afterwards. So I think it's really filling a gap of content that you don't find for children out there currently.
Why doesn't she have a mouth?
The people who created her didn't want Asian girls to speak up about who they are. Yeah, to speak up about who they were.
We are in such a paradigm shift right now as a society, as a community, and a lot of this shift of whether it kind of happens at all or successfully will depend on the youngest generation. And that's why we need to invest in getting young folks out to vote, to get them thinking and talking, to not treat them as these innocent things that can't be exposed to something.
If every single person on earth could see it, I think they would understand the oppression that happens in day-to-day society.
Radical Cram School!
He's the founder of the LA Urban Policy Roundtable. His words have been printed in Time Magazine, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, just to name a few. Let's make the acquaintance of the profound Earl Ofari Hutchinson. I'm so delighted today to be joined by someone who has had a lifetime of commitment to explain issues that are tough to understand and help us all move forward. It is so wonderful to be joined today by writer, political analyst, Earl Ofari Hutchinson. So nice to have you here, sir.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
In terms of race and equality, have there been any, are we progressing at all?
You know, Maria, I get that question a lot. And it's always, are we going forward, standing still, or going backwards? And I always start with this. The glass is half full and half empty. So, I mean, obviously, as a country, we're not where we were, say, in 1970. I mean, obviously, we don't have legal segregation anymore. Obviously, we don't have, you know, the Jim Crow and all those barriers then. And the good thing is we've seen so much progress in terms of economic uplift from so many that have been dispossessed over time, particularly African Americans, Hispanics, and other people of color. I mean, that's the half full part, but then we got to be realistic. There is a half empty part too. Certainly the last 3 or 4 years in this country, when we see the rise of white nationalism, white supremacy, when we see the violence, we see the polarization that's there, when we see by every standard more poor people now, all the statistics and surveys have shown, you know, poverty has grown to such a point. We're in LA now. I mean, when you drive down some of the streets, they look like Calcutta. You have this side by side. You have much progress that's been made, but you have so much in many ways that actually has taken a step backward.
You have been a strong voice in Black Lives Matter for a while, well, but now there is probably a larger awareness for people who had not thought about it. What mistakes should we avoid, and what things should we do to demonstrate that there is an amount of compassion and caring and awareness now that maybe we didn't have before?
Recently in LA and many other cities, something, to be honest with you, Maria, I never thought in my life I would see. And I stopped one day, there were about 10,000 people. They were marching. You mentioned Black Lives Matter. Now, I'm looking and I'm thinking, I don't see any African Americans. The overwhelming 95% were young whites. But also, even more importantly, the income. I mean, we're talking about some probably sons and daughters of very well-to-do people. Now, they're all marching under these huge banners, Black Lives Matter. All of them had these t-shirts on, you know, with the fist, Black Lives Matter. And I'm saying, now, if you had told me that a year ago, I'd said, you're nuts. I got a straitjacket to measure you for. It ain't gonna happen. Right. But it did happen, and it is happening. So, young people are now feeling, many young people are feeling, look, life, a black life, or a person of color's life, has oftentimes meant very little. Now, we're on your side. We're marching on your behalf. We're gonna take some of the heat. We got it. That's a good thing when you see that. But having said that, that was a good thing. Once again, I think the only little thing that kind of goes off in my head when I see this, what happens when COVID passes and you don't have time anymore? You're back in school. You follow me on this. You're back in school. You're back at work again. You're back with the partying again, with the social events. You're back in the fraternities and sororities. You're back in that life. Will you be back out there again? Or is it just a trendy kind of thing? I'd like to think it isn't.
Right.
But, and I'll leave it with the but.
With the most recent civil unrest, there does seem to be, coming from the political authority, words that imply that there is going to be policy change and that those voices have been heard.
There's always a tendency in any society at any time to always slide back to what's normal. After the protests, after you got thousands of people moving around, you know, I've always felt that established leaders can just bide their time. Just sit there and do nothing. It's almost like let the big wind pass. And then what happens is a return to normal, unless you have groups of people that are willing to sit there without TV cameras, without microphones, without reporters, that glamour stuff, willing to do the hard, dirty, in the trenches work, behind the scenes work that takes time, it takes patience, it takes a strategy, it takes a plan, it takes objectives that are clearly spelled out, and a willingness to stick to it. If you're not willing to do that, then, to me, to be honest with you, it's just feel-good stuff.
You know, you mentioned the media. The whole landscape of the media has changed so dramatically in a very short period of time. There are sources that were never available, maybe even 15, 20 years ago, the 24-hour news cycle, et cetera. And you being someone who is so familiar with the media, having written for so many publications and so many broadcasts and having your own radio program on and on and on, what should people be listening for, and what should people be ignoring when it comes to the truth and when it comes to something that is valuable for them to absorb?
Well, that's a good question too, and that's always kind of like the old Diogenes thing, walking through with a lamp looking for an honest man or a woman. You know, that's a tough one to answer. The fact is, we're bombarded with so much now. I mean, from so many sources. You know, one of the things, it's kind of off to the side a little bit, but bear with me with this. In another world, also have another little passion, urban ballroom dancing. So we cut a little 4-minute video where I was showing some of the urban ballroom dance moves. Now here's the thing, when I do my big ticket political, social stuff, the writings, live streaming, social media, commentary, you know, it's like I get a yawn, maybe 5 people. This little 4-minute ballroom dance segment, I mean, thousands of people, tuned into it. I said, I can't believe this. I can't get 5 people, you know, when I write something serious. But this little frivolous, off to the side, fun and games, there's a point there. Back to your question, what happens is, I think people are so bombarded with, quote unquote, the political, the social, that 24-hour news cycle that we see. I mean, how much can a person take of this? I need a relief. I need to have some fun. I need an escape. I need to get away from this. So trying to talk to people, trying to influence people, it's very difficult now because we have an overglut now. We really do. We have an overglut, and there's only so much in the human psyche that you can take at one time before you shut down. Oftentimes, you shut down to those compelling facts, those compelling truths, compelling things of action that people need to take to change their lives and to change society. So, because we've gone to the other extreme, to be brutally frank, we have too much. We have too much, and frankly, so many distractions.
Well, you are a doctor of humanity. I mean, you have a doctorate in sociology, correct?
Correct.
So, you know, you definitely not only look at the issues, but you look at the human spirit behind those issues. You do actually write about what you see is going to happen and why it's going to happen.
So I get into trouble because sometimes I put on the table painful truths. I'm not one to deny things. Nor am I one just to go along with the crowd. I have to tell you, Maria, my life has been this. When the crowd goes this way, I tend to go the other way. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. But I'm not one that goes along with always the thinking as is.
Well, I am really honored to have had this time with you. I certainly hope that people hear, read, and listen to what you say because it's an incredibly important thing. So.
Well, I want to thank you for having me in Channel 35. I appreciated that.